The parking lot outside Fort Campbell was empty at 2:47 in the morning except for me and the sound of my own boots on pavement. I had just pulled a 14-hour shift reviewing deployment rosters for the third time that week, and my neck ached in the way that means sleep is already 2 days overdue. My patrol cover was still on my head. My coffee was cold. My car was 60 feet away, and all I wanted in the world was to get inside it, drive home, and close my eyes before the sun came up. That was when my phone rang. Before we get into today's story, take just 1 second to like this video and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know who's joining me today. The screen said Kayla, my daughter, and my first thought was that she had locked herself out of her apartment again. She was 23, a nursing student. She had locked herself out 3 times in the past year, and each time she called me with that same slightly embarrassed laugh. I answered on the second ring. There was no laugh this time. "Mom," her voice was barely above a whisper, the kind of whisper that isn't a choice, it's a warning. "Mom, I need you to stay calm." I stopped walking. "Kayla, where are you?" A breath, then barely audible. "I'm in the bathroom, I locked the door, but I don't know how long he'll let me stay in here." The cold October air suddenly felt colder. "He who?" I asked, though part of me already knew. She had been dadding Marcus Hale for 7 months. I had met him twice. Both times he smiled too easily and talked too much, the way people do when they are trying to make sure you don't ask the right questions. I had said nothing. She was 23. She was smart. She had the right to make her own choices. I told myself that, and kept telling myself that right up until this moment. "Marcus," she breathed. "He took everything, Mom, my keys, my phone charger. He won't let me leave. We had an argument and I tried to walk out and he stood in front of the door." A pause. "He said if I leave, I'll regret it." 24 years of training tells you to gather information before you act. 24 years of training tells you to assess the situation, build a complete picture, and move with a plan. I did none of that. I turned around and walked straight back to my car. "Listen to me," I said. "Are you hurt?" "No, not yet, Mom, please don't." "How long have you been in that bathroom?" "Maybe 40 minutes. I got in the car and started the engine. The dashboard clock read 2:49. Her apartment was on the east side of Clarksville, 16 minutes away on empty roads at that hour, closer to 12 if I didn't stop for red lights. "Stay on the phone with me," I said. "Don't open that door until I call your name." "Mom, you don't have to." "Kayla." My voice was the same voice I used with soldiers who needed to hear something clearly once and only once. "I am already in the car." She went quiet, then very softly, "Okay." I drove with one hand on the wheel and my phone on the seat beside me, on speaker, listening to the silence from her end, the small sounds of a bathroom, a faucet dripping, her careful breathing. No television in the background. No voices, just the pressure of a door between my daughter and a man she had trusted. I thought about the first time I had dropped Kayla off at college. She had stood outside the dormitory with her 2 suitcases and waved at me with this expression, part excitement, part terror, and I had driven away telling myself that she was ready, that I had prepared her, that the world would be kind to her because she was good. I had been wrong about the last part. The light at Madison Street turned red. I drove through it. I was not angry yet. Anger is loud, and loud things slow you down. What I felt was something more like a door closing inside my chest. Quiet, deliberate, final. I had gone to war twice. I had buried people I loved. I had sat across from generals who told me that things I knew were wrong were going to happen anyway, and I had held my tongue because the mission required it. This was not that situation. At 3:03 in the morning, I turned onto Ridgeline Drive. Her apartment building was a 3-story brick structure with a busted entrance light and a parking lot that needed resurfacing. Marcus's black Dodge Charger was parked directly in front of the door, like he wanted anyone watching to know he was there. I parked beside it. I did not call the police. I will tell you why in a moment. I got out of the car, still in my full uniform, rank, patches, everything, and I walked to apartment 2C and I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. Marcus, open this door. Footsteps. Then the sound of the lock being turned, slowly, the way someone does when they're deciding whether to be innocent or intimidating and haven't made up their mind yet. The door opened. He was tall, 6'2", maybe 6'3", with the kind of build that probably made him feel like he didn't have to back down from things. He was wearing a gray t-shirt and athletic shorts, and his jaw was tight, and his eyes were doing the calculation that men do in that moment when they realize the situation has changed. He looked at my rank. He looked at my face. And the tightness left his jaw immediately. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropped about 3 registers. "I can explain, please." I looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then I said, "Where is my daughter?" Marcus stepped back. He didn't have much choice. I walked past him into the apartment the way you walk through a room you've already decided belongs to you. Not aggressively. Quietly. With the kind of stillness that is more unsettling than noise, because it means the person using it has already thought further ahead than you have. "Kayla," I called. A pause. Then the sound of a bathroom lock turning. She came out into the hallway looking smaller than I had seen her look since she was about 8 years old. Her eyes were red. Her hair was still pulled up from a shift she had worked earlier, and she was wearing her nursing scrubs. She had been in her work clothes when this started, which meant she had come home tired and walked straight into this. She held her phone charger in both hands like she had managed to grab it before everything else was taken. She looked at me, and her chin started to tremble. "I told you not to come," she whispered. "I know," I said. "Come here." She crossed the room, and I put one arm around her, and she pressed her face against my shoulder and took one long, shaking breath, and I let her. I didn't move. I didn't say anything else. I just held my daughter in the apartment of a man who had stood in front of a door to keep her inside, and I gave her 15 seconds to breathe before I turned around. Marcus was standing near the kitchen counter. He had adopted the posture men adopt when they realize a situation requires a story, back slightly straight, hands loose, expression calibrated to something between concern and reasonableness. "Mrs. Carter," he started. "Captain Carter," I said. He blinked. "Captain Carter, this is a misunderstanding. Kayla and I were having a disagreement and things got heated. I never touched her. I would never." "You took her keys," I said. He opened his mouth. "You took her phone charger," I said. "You stood in front of the door, and she was in that bathroom for 40 minutes. I watched his face carefully. "That's not a disagreement, Marcus. That's a hostage situation with better furniture." His expression shifted, just slightly. The reasonableness dialed back and something harder came up underneath it, the way a real face appears when the performance slips. "I love her," he said. "I was scared she was going to leave and I panicked. That's all this was." I had heard that exact sentence before, from different mouths, in different rooms. I had heard it from soldiers explaining why they hadn't followed protocol. I had heard it from people who did harmful things and needed the word love to stand between them and accountability. The word love doesn't do that. It never did. "Kayla," I said without looking away from Marcus, "get your bag." "I don't want to make this worse," she said quietly. "It's already what it is," I said. "Get your bag." She moved past me toward the bedroom. Marcus watched her go and then looked back at me, and there was something in his expression I recognized. Not quite anger, not quite fear, but a kind of bruised pride, the specific injury of a man who is used to being the authority in a room and suddenly isn't. "She's not leaving," he said, quietly, almost to himself. I took one step toward him, just one. "Say that again," I said. He didn't. Here is what I knew about Marcus Hale at that moment, standing in his apartment at 3 in the morning. I knew he was 27. I knew he worked at a car dealership on the west side of Clarksville. I knew he had brought Kayla flowers the first month they dated, and then stopped, the way some people stop once they feel certain of something. I knew she had made excuses for him 4 times in conversations with me over the past few months. 4 times I had counted, because I count things, because that is what 24 years of service trains you to do. What I did not know yet What I would not know until much later was that Marcus Hale had done this before. That Kayla was not the first woman who had stood in a bathroom waiting for someone to come. That there was a name I didn't know yet, a woman named Dina, and a story that would change everything I thought I understood about the situation I was already standing in the middle of. But that was later. Right now, Kayla came back out of the bedroom with her overnight bag and her keys. She had found them on the kitchen counter, where he had left them in plain sight, which told me exactly how confident he had been that she would stay. "Let's go," I said. She nodded. At the door, Marcus tried one more time. "Kayla, please, just let me explain." She stopped. For just a moment, she stopped. And I watched my daughter's face do something complicated, the 7 months of good mornings and dinner reservations and someone who had made her feel chosen, all of it pressing against this night, against that bathroom door, against 40 minutes of waiting and not knowing. She turned around. "Leave my charger on the porch," she said. "I'll pick it up in the morning." Then she walked out. She didn't look at him again. I watched her do that, make that choice, hold it together, and I thought, there she is. There is the woman I raised. I followed her out into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind me. The lock clicked. Neither of us spoke until we were in the car. I drove with the heater on low because Kayla was cold, the way she always gets when she's upset. Her hands go first, then her arms, like her body is trying to conserve heat around the important parts. She sat with her knees pulled up to her chest and stared out the passenger window at the empty streets, and for a while I let the quiet settle between us the way it needed to. It was almost 4 in the morning. The town was dark except for gas stations and one diner with its lights still on. I had nowhere specific to be driving, so I drove toward my house out of habit, and she didn't object. After about 6 minutes, she spoke. "You knew," she said. "Not an accusation, just a recognition." "I suspected," I said. She nodded slowly. I kept telling myself it wasn't as bad as it looked, that I was being dramatic. A pause. "He's good at making you feel dramatic." That landed quietly. I didn't say anything back, because sometimes the most useful thing you can do is not fill the space. "He's kind when things are going his way," she said. "And then something shifts and he becomes this other version of himself, and the next day he's back to being kind." And I kept thinking, if I'm patient enough, if I'm careful enough, the good version will just stay. She turned from the window and looked at me. "That's exhausting to say out loud." "I know," I said. "I didn't want to tell you," she said, "because I knew you'd come, and I knew how that would look. Me calling my mom in the middle of the night like I can't handle my own life." I pulled to a stop at a light that was red for no reason at 4 in the morning, and I left my hands on the wheel and looked at the empty intersection. "Kayla," I said, "I have held the rank of lieutenant colonel in the United States Army for 3 years. I have managed 1,800 personnel. I have given orders in 2 countries. I paused. "And the hardest thing I have ever done is watch you struggle and wait for you to ask for help." She was quiet. "Asking for help isn't weakness," I said. "It's just knowing which resource to deploy." She laughed, not loudly, but she laughed, the first time since that phone call. We drove the rest of the way to my house, and I made her tea, the kind with honey that I used to make when she was little and had a fever. And she sat at my kitchen counter and began to tell me things she had been carrying alone for longer than one night. The first argument had been in March. He had taken her phone out of her hands during a dinner because she was distracted. She had let it go. The first time he stood in front of a door was in June. He had apologized the next morning with breakfast and a card. The names he called her were always delivered quietly, in private, never in front of people. Sensitive, overdramatic, ungrateful. Words that sounded like concern, but landed like small injuries, accumulating slowly the way water damage does. By the time you see the problem, it's already inside the walls. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. I did not say "I told you so," because that sentence has never once helped anyone. I just listened to my daughter describe 7 months of a relationship designed to make her smaller, and I held my tea mug and felt that quiet door inside me close another inch. What I did not tell her yet, what I had decided to find out first, was that I had already taken a photo of Marcus's front door when I left. The lock, the frame, the address, force of habit. You document what you find. You never know what you'll need later. I also didn't tell her that on my way back to the car, I had noticed something through the gap in his curtain. A laptop, open, on the kitchen counter, with a woman's photo on the screen that wasn't Kayla. I filed that away. I always file things away. Kayla fell asleep on my couch around 5 that morning, still in her scrubs, one hand curled under her chin the way she slept as a child. I covered her with the blanket from the armchair and stood in the doorway of my living room for a long moment. Then I went to my home office, sat down at my desk, and began to research Marcus Hale. Marcus Elijah Hale, 27 years old, Clarksville, Tennessee, originally from Memphis. It took me 3 hours of careful, methodical searching, the kind you do when you're not looking for something dramatic, just building a picture one layer at a time. What I found on the surface was ordinary. Social media profiles with car photos and gym selfies, a LinkedIn page listing 4 years at different dealerships, 2 parking tickets, nothing alarming. The picture of a man who wanted to be seen as successful and wasn't quite there yet. Then I went a layer deeper. Dina Marsh, 26, Nashville, Tennessee. She appeared in a public post from 2 years ago, a local community forum where someone had asked if anyone else had experience with a man named Marcus Hale. Dina had responded with exactly 3 sentences. Yes, I know him. He seems charming until he decides you're not allowed to leave. That was it. No details. No police report attached. Just 3 sentences that a woman had put on the internet because she needed someone else to find them someday. I found them. I sat with that for a while. The sun was coming up outside my window, and the neighborhood was starting its ordinary morning. A neighbor's sprinklers, a dog somewhere, someone backing out of a driveway, and I sat in the middle of all that ordinary life holding the knowledge that the man currently waiting for my daughter to come back had done this at least once before. The moral calculation of what to do next is not as simple as it looks from the outside. I had no legal authority over Marcus Hale. Kayla was 23. She had made choices. She would continue making choices. I couldn't arrest him for being controlling. That's not how the law works. I couldn't make the last 7 months not have happened. What I could do was make sure the story didn't continue. I thought about Dina Marsh and her 3 sentences, and I thought about how long it must have taken her to decide to write even that much. And I thought about the next woman, the one who didn't know yet what Marcus Hale looked like at 3 in the morning when someone tried to leave. I made a decision. I picked up my phone and called a woman named Colonel Janet Reeves. We had gone through officer training together 20 years ago, and she was now the civilian liaison at the county courthouse. I did not ask her to do anything inappropriate. I simply asked her who I should speak to, legally and properly, about documenting what had happened the previous night. She gave me a name, Detective Carl Patterson, domestic situations specialist, former military himself. "He's good," Janet said. "He listens to the whole thing before he decides anything." "That's all I need," I said. I called Detective Patterson at 8:30 that morning. He answered on the second ring. Detective Carl Patterson met me at a coffee shop on Fort Campbell Boulevard at 10 o'clock that morning. He was a quiet man in his early 50s, the kind of compact, deliberate person who makes you feel he has heard everything and judged nothing. He wore plain clothes and carried a small notepad, and he shook my hand like a man who meant it. I told him everything. The call, the drive, the apartment, what Kayla had told me, Dina Marsh's 3 sentences online. He listened, without writing anything down for the first 10 minutes, which I respected. Then he said, "How is your daughter?" "Asleep on my couch," I said. He nodded. "Does she know you're here?" "No," I said. "I'll tell her tonight." He studied me for a moment. "What is it you want out of this conversation, Captain?" I appreciated that he asked. Most people don't ask. "I want to know what options exist," I said. "I'm not here to shortcut the process. I'm here to understand it." He flipped open the notepad. "Tell me about the door." I told him. He wrote that down. The keys. I told him. He wrote that down. The 40 minutes. I told him. He sat back in his chair and looked at his coffee. What you're describing is what we call coercive control. It doesn't always leave marks. It doesn't always make it into a report. But it's real, and it has a pattern, and the pattern matters. Dina Marsh, I said. He looked up. 2 years ago, I said. Nashville. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he wrote that name down slowly, like he was being careful with it. I'll make some calls this afternoon. I reached into my pocket and slid a folded piece of paper across the table, the address of Marcus's apartment, the parking spot number, the time I had arrived, the physical description of what I had observed. He picked it up and read it without expression. You document quickly. It's a habit, I said. Good habit. He pocketed the paper. I want to be straightforward with you, Captain. This is going to be slow. These cases usually are. What happened last night, restraining a person's movement, taking their property, that can be a charge. But I need your daughter's statement. I need her to be willing. I know, I said. She may not be, not right away. I know that too. He looked at me with an expression that was something close to respect. A lot of parents in your position would have made this about themselves by now. I thought about that. She's the one who was in the bathroom, I said. This is about her. We shook hands again at the door. As he turned to leave, he paused. One more thing, he said. The woman from Nashville, if she's willing to be contacted. I'll reach out, I said, if you think it helps. I think it might, he said. I drove home in the late morning light, and when I got there, Kayla was up. She was sitting at my kitchen table in one of my old army sweatshirts, eating toast, and when I came in, she looked at me the way you look at someone when you already half know what they've been doing. Where did you go? She asked. I sat down across from her. I need to tell you something, I said, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. She put her toast down. Okay, she said. I told Kayla about Dina Marsh that morning at my kitchen table, with the October sun coming through the window and 2 mugs of coffee going cold between us. I told her about the 3 sentences, about what they meant, about the fact that Marcus Hale had done this at least once before to at least one other woman before he found my daughter. Kayla sat with her hands flat on the table. She didn't cry. She went very still in the way she goes still when she is processing something too big to react to immediately, the same way she had sat when her father and I told her we were divorcing 12 years ago. Just still, present, absorbing it. He told me I was his fresh start, she said finally. He said his last relationship had been toxic and he was done with drama. She paused. He used the word healing a lot. He used it with Dina too, I said. Probably. She looked at her coffee. How do you know that? Because people who do what he does tend to use the same story, I said. The previous relationship is always toxic. They're always recovering. They need someone patient, someone understanding, someone who will stay. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that I wasn't expecting. I want to talk to her, she said. I looked at her. Dina, she said, I want to talk to her, not for any legal reason, I just want to know if she's okay. She looked up at me. Is that strange? No, I said. I think it's exactly right. I had already found Dina's email through a mutual connection, a nursing school colleague who knew someone from Nashville, and I gave Kayla the address that afternoon. I gave her privacy to write the message herself. I went outside and sat on the porch and listened to the neighbor's dog bark at the wind. 30 minutes later, Kayla came out and sat beside me. I sent it, she said. Good, I said. She leaned her head against my shoulder. We sat there in the cold October afternoon and watched the leaves come down from the oak tree in my yard, and she said nothing for a while and then said, I'm not going back. I know, I said. I think I knew before last night, she said, but I needed last night to make it undeniable. Is that bad? No, I said, that's human. She was quiet again. Then, were you scared when you drove there? I thought about the honest answer. Not for myself, I said. She nodded. That's what I thought. What I didn't say, sitting there on the porch, was that something had been growing in me since that morning's conversation with Detective Patterson. Something patient and precise and pointed in a very specific direction. Not anger. Something more useful than anger. Purpose. Because Marcus Hale had spent 7 months carefully, methodically taking pieces of my daughter. Her confidence. Her sense of what was normal. Her ability to trust what she felt. He had done it quietly, in private, in a way designed to leave no evidence and no easy explanation. He had assumed he could do all of that and face no consequence. That assumption was wrong. And he was about to find out exactly how wrong. Dina Marsh replied to Kayla's email within 12 hours. Her message was 2 pages long. Kayla read it at my kitchen table the next morning and handed it to me without saying a word. I read it standing up because I couldn't sit. Dina had met Marcus 3 years ago in Memphis, right before he moved to Clarksville. The relationship had started exactly the same way: charm, attention, the feeling of being completely seen by another person. He had been tender and attentive and made her feel, for the first 4 months, like she had found someone genuinely rare. Then, slowly, the exits started closing. First, her friend group. He hadn't liked them, said they were bad influences, that they didn't respect her the way he did. She had drifted from them one by one. Then her family. He had a gift for subtle damage, a comment here, a withheld affection there, until the people who loved Dina started feeling like the problem instead of the solution. Then her routines, her gym, her Thursday night pottery class, the small, ordinary pleasures of a life that belonged to her. And then, one night, he stood in front of a door. She had left anyway, finally, after 8 months. She had told no one the details because she didn't think anyone would understand a story where she had no broken bones and no police report and nothing to show except a version of herself that was quieter and smaller and less certain than the one she'd started with. She ended the email with one sentence: "I am so glad she has you." I set the pages down on the table. Kayla was watching me. "What are we going to do?" she asked. "What do you want to do?" I asked. She thought about it for a long time, long enough that I went and made fresh coffee and brought it back to the table. "I want him to know it's over," she said. "Not in a phone call, not in a text. I want him to understand, really understand, that there are no more chances, that I know who he is, and that the people around me know too." She looked at me steadily. "Is that revenge?" I considered the word. "No," I said. "That's accountability. Revenge is about making someone hurt. Accountability is about making sure they can't pretend the truth doesn't exist." She nodded slowly. Detective Patterson called that afternoon. Dina Marsh had agreed to speak with him, combined with Kayla's formal statement, which she had given the previous morning while I waited in the hallway, because this needed to be her voice. Not mine. Patterson said there was enough to formally investigate the coercive control and unlawful restraint from the night I arrived. "It's a process," Patterson said. "I want to manage expectations, but we have 2 witnesses, a documented pattern, and a timeline. That matters." "I understand processes," I said. "I know you do," he said. What Patterson didn't know, what I hadn't told him yet, was what I had discovered that afternoon in a conversation with Janet Reeves. Marcus Hale had applied, 3 weeks earlier, for a position as a juvenile program coordinator at a local youth center, working with teenage girls between the ages of 14 and 18. He had included a reference letter from his supervisor at the dealership. He had passed the initial screening. He was 1 step away from a background check. I stared at Janet's text on my phone for a long moment. Then I called her back. I want to be careful about how I tell this part of the story, because this is the part where it would have been very easy to let anger make my decisions for me. And I had the tools to cause damage, if that had been what I wanted. I knew people. I had rank. I had access to networks that Marcus Hale had never considered existed. But damage done in anger is still damage, and it has a way of spreading sideways and hitting things you didn't intend. So I did it the right way. I called the director of the youth center, a woman named Sandra Willis, who had worked in community outreach for 20 years and whose contact information was public on the center's website. I did not introduce my rank first. I introduced myself as the mother of a woman who had been in a relationship with one of her applicants. I told her what I told Patterson: the apartment, the keys, the 40 minutes, and Dina Marsh, who had now given her permission to be named. Sandra Willis listened to all of it without interrupting, which told me she was either a good listener or had heard enough similar things to know not to rush them. When I finished, she said, "Is there a formal investigation?" "In process," I said. Silence. "Mrs. Carter." "Captain Carter," I said gently, not aggressively. "Captain Carter," she said. "Thank you for calling. Background checks catch criminal convictions. They don't catch what you're describing. They don't catch patterns." "I know," I said. "That's why I called." There was a pause. "I'll put the position on hold pending review," she said. "That's all I can tell you right now." "That's all I asked," I said. When I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time. The thing about doing the right thing through the right channels is that it is slower and less satisfying in the short term than any of the other options. There is no dramatic moment. No scene where the villain folds under pressure while you watch. It is a series of phone calls and paperwork and careful conversations, and the slow, painstaking process of documented truth doing its work. But the truth is a long game, and I had time. Kayla was rebuilding, one day at a time. She went back to her apartment with Karen, her roommate from nursing school, who had been trying for 2 months to gently tell her what she didn't want to hear and was now making her soup and lending her sweaters. She went back to her Thursday night study group, which she had quietly let lapse around month 3 of dating Marcus. She called Dina Marsh one Sunday afternoon, and they talked for almost 2 hours. And when Kayla came out of her bedroom, she looked simultaneously devastated and relieved, the expression of someone who has finally met the person who speaks their exact language. I watched all of this from the right distance, close enough to be there, far enough to let her stand. And then, 6 weeks after that night in the parking lot at Fort Campbell, Marcus Hale made a mistake. He showed up at my house. It was a Saturday morning in late November. I had taken a rare day with no agenda, no reports, no briefings, no calls, and I was in the kitchen making pancakes when I heard the knock. I already knew before I opened it. Something in the cadence of it, 2 sharp raps, then a pause, then one more, the same rhythm a man uses when he is trying to seem controlled but isn't. I opened the door. Marcus Hale was standing on my porch in a jacket that was a little too thin for the weather and an expression that had been assembled to communicate contrition, but was assembled slightly wrong, the way things look when they're performed rather than felt. "Captain Carter," he said, "I just need 5 minutes." I looked at him for a long moment. I did not feel afraid. I did not feel triumphant. What I felt was something close to tired, the specific exhaustion of watching someone arrive at a situation too late to change it and still believing their presence can redirect it. "5 minutes for what?" I said. "To explain," he said. "To apologize. I know how that night looked. I know what Kayla thinks happened, but if you would just let me." "What Kayla thinks happened," I said, "is what happened." His expression shifted. "You've already decided." I arrived at the decision when I kicked open an apartment door at 3 in the morning and found my daughter in a locked bathroom, I said. The deciding was done that night. He looked down at the porch. When he looked back up, the performance had dropped slightly, and what was underneath it was just a young man in the cold, losing something he'd planned to keep. "I love her," he said. "I made mistakes, I know that, but I love her and I'm asking you to give me the opportunity to prove." "Marcus," I said. He stopped. "Detective Patterson called me yesterday," I said. "Dina Marsh gave her statement Thursday morning. The investigation is formal now. Whatever you came here to say, you should probably say it to your attorney instead." The color left his face. I watched it leave. It wasn't satisfying the way I might have imagined it would be. It was just a moment, A young man on a porch understanding that the story he had been telling about himself had finally met the record. I didn't know she was going to, he started. Go home, Marcus, I said. I closed the door. I stood in my hallway for a moment, listening to the silence. Then I heard his car start. Then I heard it pull away. I went back to the kitchen and finished making pancakes. An hour later, Kayla called. She had heard from Patterson herself. She was quiet on the phone, the way she gets when she is feeling something large and hasn't sorted out what to do with it yet. Are you okay? I asked. I think so, she said. I feel like I should feel worse. You don't have to feel worse, I said. He came to your house, didn't he? She said. I paused. How did you know? Because that's what he does when he thinks something is slipping away, she said. He shows up. He talks. He tries to make you feel like the problem is your interpretation, not his behavior. A pause. What did you say? I told him to speak to his attorney, I said. She laughed just once, short and real. Of course you did. Pancakes, I said. I made too many. She came over that afternoon and sat at my kitchen counter, and we ate pancakes in the November quiet, and she told me about a patient she'd had that week, a woman in her 80s who had held her hand and told her she had beautiful posture. It was such a small, ordinary story, and Kayla told it with this warmth in her voice that hadn't been there 2 months ago, and I thought, there she is again, coming back. She spent the afternoon helping me repot a houseplant I'd had for 3 years and never quite gotten around to. We made a mess of the kitchen table with soil and ceramic pots and the quiet kind of conversation that doesn't need a destination. At one point, she looked at me across the mess and said, "Thank you for coming that night." "Don't thank me," I said. "You called, that's the part that matters." She considered that. I almost didn't. "I know," I said, "but you did." The court hearing was on a Tuesday in January, 49 days after a 2:47 a.m. phone call changed the direction of everything. I want to tell you it looked like the movies. I want to tell you there were dramatic speeches and a packed room and a moment where Marcus Hale broke down and confessed everything in front of a crowd of people who finally understood what he had done. It didn't look like the movies. It was a quiet municipal courtroom with cream-colored walls and fluorescent lighting, and the low hum of a legal process doing what legal processes do, slowly, carefully, without theatrics. Detective Patterson sat 2 rows in front of us. Sandra Willis from the Youth Center had submitted a written statement about the halted application, which the prosecutor had included in the documentation. The center's director had since gone further. After completing their own review, they had posted a notice in their volunteer network, quietly, through proper channels, doing the work that communities do when they decide someone should not have unsupervised access to vulnerable people. Dina Marsh was not in the courtroom, but her statement was. I had read it the night before, with Kayla's permission. It was 16 pages. It was specific and measured and devastating in the way that truth is when it has been carefully held for a long time and finally released. Kayla sat beside me in a dark blazer with her hands in her lap. She had given her statement 2 weeks earlier in a conference room with Patterson present, and she had come out of that room looking tired but straighter somehow, like something had been put down. Marcus sat with his attorney across the room. He did not look at us. The charges were unlawful restraint and criminal coercion, not the largest charges in the world, not the ones that make front pages, but real charges, documented, on record, attached to his name in the system that background checks run through. The attorney argued stress, financial pressure, emotional immaturity, a first-time offense. The prosecutor didn't raise her voice. She simply laid out the timeline, the documented texts, the statement from Kayla, the statement from Dina, the phone call at 2:47 a.m., the 40 minutes, the keys on the counter. The judge, a woman in her 60s, who had the expression of someone who has heard every version of this story and remains committed to paying attention anyway, read through the documents with total patience. Marcus was found guilty on both counts. He received a sentence of 2 years probation, mandatory counseling, and a permanent protective order requiring no contact with Kayla Carter or Dina Marsh. The youth center application was formally denied. The room was quiet when the gavel came down. Kayla exhaled very slowly beside me, one long, measured breath, like she'd been holding it since November. Outside the courthouse, the January air was sharp and bright. Patterson shook my hand and then turned to Kayla and shook her hand too, which I noticed and appreciated. A reporter from a local paper was waiting near the steps. Apparently someone had tipped him to the case because of the youth center element. He approached us with a notebook. "Ms. Carter," he said, looking at Kayla, "how do you feel about the outcome?" She thought about it. Not the short pause of someone reaching for a practiced answer, but a real pause, someone genuinely consulting what they actually feel before they say it. "Relieved," she said, "and sad, both at the same time, because I don't think this is what anybody would have chosen." She looked toward the courthouse doors. "But I think it was necessary." The reporter wrote that down. Then he turned to me. "And you, Captain Carter, any comments on how this case came together?" I looked at my daughter standing in the January sunlight in her dark blazer, her shoulders back, her face open and tired and present. Then I looked at the reporter. "My daughter called me," I said simply. "That's the whole story." We drove to lunch after, a diner on the edge of town that Kayla had been wanting to try, the kind of place with red vinyl booths and coffee that comes in thick ceramic mugs. We ordered more food than we needed and ate slowly and talked about things that had nothing to do with Marcus Hale or courtrooms or any of the past 2 months. She told me about a professor who had praised her clinical assessment skills, about a podcast she'd gotten obsessed with about unsolved historical mysteries, about a hiking trail Karen had found outside of town that she wanted to try in the spring. I told her about a soldier in my unit who had just been promoted and the look on his face when he found out, about the terrible novel I was trying to read and couldn't finish, about the houseplant we had repotted, which was showing new growth. Ordinary things, the vocabulary of a life that belongs to you. At one point, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. No reason, no occasion. I squeezed back. On the drive home, she was quiet for a while, looking out at the January fields, and then she said, "You know what I keep thinking about?" "What?" I said. "Dina." She turned the name over like she was still getting used to the weight of it. "I keep thinking about how she wrote those 3 sentences on that forum and then just waited, not knowing if they would ever matter, not knowing if anyone would ever find them." She paused. "And then I think about how you found them." "You would have found them eventually," I said. "Maybe," she said, "but you found them in time." I thought about that for the rest of the drive, about what it means to pay attention, about the difference between seeing something and cataloging it and letting it sit until the moment when it matters, about the 3 sentences of a woman I had never met that became, eventually, part of the wall that stopped something from continuing. There is a version of this story where I never found Dina, where Patterson had only one statement and less documentation, and the case moved differently, where Marcus Hale became a youth program coordinator the following spring. That version didn't happen. I am grateful every day that it didn't. When I got home that evening, I sat in my home office for a while in the quiet. The houseplant on the windowsill had 3 new leaves since we'd repotted it. I hadn't noticed until now. I thought about my daughter's voice at 2:47 in the morning, that whisper that wasn't a choice, that was a warning, and how much courage it takes to make a call like that when you're sitting in a locked bathroom not knowing who will believe you. She called me. Of all the people she could have called in that dark apartment, 40 minutes in, she called me. I think about what that means. I try to deserve it every day. Marcus Hale completed the first year of his probation the following January. Kayla passed her nursing boards that same month. She framed the results certificate and put it in her apartment, a new apartment, on a street with better lighting and a neighbor named Patricia who had a garden and brought her rosemary from it. She called me the day the certificate arrived. "I did it," she said. "I know you did," I said. "I'm going to hang it over my desk," she said. So I see it every morning when I sit down to study. That's a good place for it, I said. A pause then. Mom. Yeah. Thank you for picking up the phone. I smiled. Thank you for dialing. One Tuesday morning the following March, she came over for coffee like she started doing after that November, just because, no occasion. And I had the back door open because the temperature had finally broken, and the yard was doing that thing it does in early spring when the brown comes back to green. We sat at the kitchen table with our coffee, and she told me about a patient she'd had that week, a little boy who had been afraid of the IV and how she'd talked him through it, and the look on his mother's face when he stopped crying. She told it with her whole face. I thought, there she is, all the way back. It doesn't always end like this. I know that. I know that some calls don't get answered. Some drives take too long. Some courtrooms go a different way. I know that for every Dina Marsh who writes 3 sentences and waits, there are others who never find the right person to find them. I can only tell you what happened in my case. I can only tell you that my daughter called, and I answered, and that the truth, slow and careful and unglamorous as it was, did what it was supposed to do. And when people ask me now what happened that night, I keep it simple. She called, I came. That's what mothers do. Everything after that was just making sure the truth had enough room to do its job. That's all revenge ever really is, when you do it right. Not fury, not fire. Just the patient, unwavering decision to make sure that what is real cannot be buried. The end. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that the people who love you are worth calling, and that truth is stronger than any story built to contain it, I hope you'll carry that with you. Take care of yourself, and take care of the people standing with you when the night gets long.